Today, we heard testimony from two distinguished panels of witnesses regarding MSA reauthorization from the perspective of the Pacific and West Pacific, specifically addressing management issues in Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, and our nation's insular areas in the West Pacific. We hope to learn more about the impacts that MSA is having on these regions' important fisheries, the individuals, businesses, and communities who depend on them, and how the Act might be improved. I look forward to the hearing from our witnesses today and how these changes and updates to MSA are being implemented and what effects they are having. As we get ready here before the testimony, I will say Senator Rubio is on his way, and I may interrupt the sequence of testimony to allow him to do his opening, but let me also look at that. I was trying to buy just a little bit of time. Timing is everything, but let me, before I have the ranking member, Senator Rubio, make his opening, let me also say, as I said, this will be, we have one more hearing in this series that we've done in regards to the MSA reauthorization. Once we're completed, we are trying to focus on the first part, the first week of March, to lay down a bill that would be a framework bill that would start us in the process of moving forward based on all the input that we have done. We've tried to do this a little differently. Instead of laying a bill down then having the hearings, we've tried to have the hearings to get input and then craft a bill that recognizes these responses and also the interest that people may have. So we're looking forward to that. And again, we're trying to shoot for the first week of March for people who are thinking of the timetable here. So thank you very much. Let me now introduce Senator Rubio, the ranking member from Florida, to say a few comments, and then we'll go right into testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize for being late, but thank you for holding this hearing. I'm going to keep my statement rather brief because there might be members here that have a bigger focus given where they're located on the Pacific and West Pacific fisheries. And this is an issue, by the way, these fisheries that I know admittedly less about. I know a lot more about the Atlantic side of the equation. But after reviewing some of the testimony of our witnesses, the common themes in reforming Magnuson are echoed again. We've heard from people both in the Gulf and in the South Atlantic, as well as the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, that greater flexibility in rebuilding timelines is a necessary reform in the next reauthorization. We've also heard the common struggles in managing data-poor stocks and the need not only to address the shortcomings in our data, but also the need to remove annual catch limits where appropriate. And several of our witnesses here today will raise that theme as well. So apparently it remains true that in every region, these are an issue. In addition to that, every region has its own unique issues. For example, tribal participation in fishery management is prevalent, particularly in the Pacific, and I'm grateful to learn more about that relationship between the tribes and the state and federal governments and how that relationship can be possibly improved in the next reauthorization. Additionally, the Pacific fisheries have a larger international component that presents unique challenges in management. So I think that's a unique aspect of it as well. And finally, the concept of ecosystem management is more realized in the Pacific and in the Western Pacific. And today we'll hear firsthand the challenges that are presented by that management style. Now, I have a conflicting hearing in foreign relations on proliferation, so I'm going to try to balance that. They don't coordinate the meetings around here all that well in terms of that, but I do appreciate today's testimony. I've read most of it, and I certainly hope it will inform us as we move one step closer to the reauthorization. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Rubio. And let me ask Senator Schatz from Hawaii if he wants to give an opening, then we'll go to testimony.
Thank you very much, Chair Begich and Ranking Member Rubio, for having this important hearing. I want to thank Arnold Palacios and Michael Goto for coming from Hawaii and from the Pacific to testify, to Westpac for their assisting in preparation, and to Mike Gravitz and MCI. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to congratulate the U.S. fishermen, NOAA Fisheries, and environmental organizations. Under the current version of MSA, they've worked together to make American fisheries management the gold standard for the world. And we are seeing the measurable success of our policies. According to NOAA Fisheries' most recent Status of Stocks report from 2013, 10% of stocks are on the subject to overfishing list compared with 14% in 2011. 19% are on the overfished list compared with 21% in 2011. 6 stocks managed under rebuilding plans have rebuilt to their target levels, bringing the total number of rebuilt stocks to 32 since the year 2000. We all know that the news is not all good, however. Although 10 stocks were removed from the subject to overfishing list, 3 stocks were added. Similarly, while 4 stocks were removed from the overfished list, 1 was added. So we need to be watchful for changes.
Chairman Beggett, honorable subcommittee members, on behalf of the Western Pacific Regional Fisheries Management Council, I thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on our perspective on the reauthorization of the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation and Management Act. The Council strongly supports improvement to the MSA that will enable the Council to conduct a more effective management and sustainable fishery development of fishery resources in our region. Before I begin my remarks, Mr. Chairman, I would like to call your attention to the attachments in our written testimony. I have one message I want you to take away from my testimony today, and that message is loss, L-O-S-S, and how to reverse this trend. Loss of fisheries, loss of fishing grounds, loss of opportunities. The United States has the largest EEZ in the world, and the Western Pacific region represents half of this. However, only 6% of the seafood we consume is landed by U.S. fisheries. Clearly, there's something wrong with this picture. We have lost a pioneering longline fisheries in the Mariana Islands and the northwestern Hawaiian Islands lobster and bottomfish fisheries. The American Samoa longline fishery, the second largest under Council jurisdiction, is on the brink. Competition from subsidized foreign fisheries, such as China, are catching the same fish and driving down prices, while operational costs for our fleets, labor, fuel, continue to increase. We are also deeply concerned about the Hawaii longline fishery, as its big-eye tuna catch has been reduced by 1/3 due to quota restriction and quota management by an international tuna convention. I submit that the MSA should contain measures to level the playing field for our U.S. vessels that minimize bycatch, such as providing subsidies for fisheries development, fuel, access fees, low-interest loan, tax breaks, and reduced import tariffs. Apart from the MSA, we continue to bury our fisheries under the ESA, the MMPA, NEPA, Sanctuaries Act, Antiquities Act, EOs, and the list goes on and on. About 90% of the spatial areas of MPAs listed in the United States are in the Western Pacific. This is a grotesque skew by any definition. Most of the marine monuments were already protected by their remoteness. Now the fishing opportunities are lost in an archipelago of paper parks where fishers are locked out forever. Further, closing fishing grounds means fishermen are subject to greater expense and may have to take greater risk to go fishing. I submit that the MSA should state that any restriction on the management of fishery resources that is necessary to implement the ESA or the MMPA must be implemented under the authority of the MSA, the Magnuson-Stevens Act. In addition, the Magnuson-Stevens Act should take precedence over National Marine Sanctuaries Act and the Antiquities Act in terms of spatial management of fisheries resources and habitats. Mr. Chairman, despite these challenges, the councils in the last 3 to 4 years have fulfilled its MSA mandates to generate ACLs, including large number of data-poor coral reef species. We continue to strive to improve our ACLs by developing innovative techniques incorporating CATS and biomass data. We are committed to working with our regional office and science center to make these improvements, as well as providing more opportunities for our communities in the Western Pacific. Mr. Chairman, we have some fundamental questions that I believe we should ask ourselves. Do we want a U.S. fishing industry? Or are we about to see more fishing vessels up for sales like the American Samoa longliners? Do we want fish on the table from American fisheries caught by American fishermen? If so, then it's time to take a long, hard look at the Magnuson-Stevens Act and the burden imposed by other statutes on our fisheries. We understand that funding are scarce and doing more with less is inevitable. However, we have a suggestion that could work, and we ask your indulgence. We ask that future increases in our SK revenue be potentially allocated to fisheries development for our nation's fisheries. Our government needs to recognize, we need to recognize, that we have the responsibility to foster sustainability of our nation's fisheries, including those in the far-flung islands in the Pacific, in the insular area, U.S. insular areas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, I have Mel Moon, Director of the Natural Resources of the Quileute Nation, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Watalik Asosta, greetings. Hach'e. Good morning. My name is Mel Moon. I'm the Director of Quileute Natural Resources for the Quileute Indian Tribe in La Push, Washington. We're a tribe that's located on the northwest Washington coast, and I'm happy to be able to speak with you in such good company. I know Mr. Stell and Dr. Isaacs, we've worked together quite a bit over time and appreciate their company and their being here today. I also want to extend a thank you to Senator Cantwell for her work and support to the Quileute tribe, especially in our tsunami bill situation. The tribe was finding itself in being located right at sea level. We were fighting the anxiety of tsunami events and potentials that would disrupt our community. But we are very thankful for your help and forever grateful. Thank you very much. I'm going to speak today about two topics in particular, and perhaps start with a little bit of a background on the tribe's history with the Magnuson Act. In 1855, 1856, the tribes entered into treaties with the United States. The Quileute tribe in particular entered into the Treaty of Olympia, which was signed in 1856. In 1970, 1971, the tribes with the U.S. government and Justice Department filed an injunction against the state of Washington because the tribes were not able to exercise their fishing rights. They were being withheld from that. 1974, the U.S. District Court Judge Bolt ruled that the tribes did retain their original fishing rights, reaffirmed that those rights were still available. The state needed to desist, and set the terms at 50% of the resource passing through the tribe's usual and custom areas. Then 1976, the Magnuson Act gets created, and it has an introduction of people like Mr. Stell and his staff and people from the Pacific Fishery Management Council. We began to have a relationship. And that was primarily with 4 tribes on the Washington coast. There was the Makah tribe, who is in the Treaty of Neah Bay. There is the Quileute tribe, the Ho tribe, and the Quinault tribe, who are part of the Treaty of Olympia. Since that time, we've had a great deal of discussion and evolution about the meaning of our fisheries and how they should be prosecuted. And some of it is under, terms of litigation, some of it is under terms of agreement, but it's gone through an evolution, I think, that has at least created, in the end, a strong relationship. So we are engaged in discussions with the Pacific Fishery Management Council and with the NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service reps on a number of our fisheries. And some of our fisheries that we deal with, like our crab, black cod, salmon, halibut, groundfish, covers quite a large range. The difference, though, is that the 4 coastal tribes actually exercise treaty rights outside of the 3-mile area of the state. So that creates a co-management relationship with the federal agency, the NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Forum. Under that, we have regular discussions on government-to-government basis about our issues. But of late, we've had recent discussions with the Council about representation and how that representation on the Pacific Fishery Management Council would be best for both sides in terms of communications and outreach. A letter was sent out to all the tribal chairs. The response was mixed, and so I think that kind of gave us a pretty clear indication that there's quite a diversity between the 25 tribes that may be affected. Our opinion is that we would like to see funding and support for the tribes to collectively create that representation structure with the PFMC process. It takes time, it takes discussion. For me to present, this is the answer, wouldn't solve the problem. So we need to have a backup, do a work group, or do a sub-forum that answers the question, what is adequate representation? Because these tribes, some are executive order, some are treaty tribes, some are still just newly recognized, and some have off-reservation rights and some don't. So there's quite a diversity in terms of the makeup of the tribal interests. The other issue I wanted to speak about was the essential fish habitat measures. It's a number of areas have been designated for special management considerations. We have several in our usual and custom area for fishing. We're witnessing some changes that are happening in our area, particularly in crab and black cod, where the fish are no longer there. So we're starting to see displacement from other fisheries that are being shut down. We're starting to see the impact of perhaps bottom trawl fisheries that are displacing some of our principal economic fisheries, such as black cod and crab. So I think we're going to take a different look at EFH. There was does marine protected areas need to be here? Well, we didn't think they needed to be. Does EFH need to be here? Well, I think we're now taking a second look at that. And again, I think we need resources to tribes in order to engage in this process adequately. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you for your testimony. I will pass by my questions. I'll go to the members in attendance and start with those who, in order of appearance, and I'll start with Senator Schatz and then Senator Cantwell. And I may forego my questions so we can get to the next panel, because I know the two senators have colleagues on there. So, Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair Begich. For Mr. Still, what's the status of the proposed amendment to the Big Eye Tuna Fishery Management Plan that would allow transfer of the quota from U.S. flag territories to Hawaii longliners?
Thank you, Senator. The status is it's out for public comment. Public comment period closes end of the month. We are on schedule to make a secretarial determination on it by the end of March. If that is affirmative, then we are anticipating implementation by May of this year. So fundamentally, it's totally on our radar screen. We're tracking it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Any additional questions? Okay, Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to submit a statement for the record, and I want to thank you for holding this hearing and for your aggressive approach to going around the country and various regions to talk about these issues, and being recently in the Pacific Northwest and focusing on a hearing as it related to our larger maritime industry. It is worth $30 billion in annual economic activity and supports 57,000 direct jobs. So when we're talking about these issues for us, it's big business. And Mr. Still, I wanted to start with you. Thank you for bringing up where we are in the Pacific Northwest as far as management sometimes. my colleague and I from Alaska get a little bit of heat from the Northeast. They don't like our opinions about where they should be on management issues, but since we have a lot more fish, it seems to be working. So one question, are there still major fisheries being managed in the U.S. that need more data and better science? And are there any data poor fisheries in the Pacific Northwest that could benefit from, a major investment?
Yes on the first, and I think, as I alluded to earlier, the Western Pacific is Exhibit A on that point on data poor fisheries. It's a major impediment. On the Pacific Coast, data poor stocks per se, Don, what do you think? How would you answer that?
Yes, thank you, Senator Cantwell. There are some data poor stocks on the West Coast. When they become a bottleneck species, it can be a problem. We have a pretty good relationship with the Science Center right now in coordinating how the science money is spent. But I'd be remiss if I did not say that additional money for science on groundfish studies would be beneficial.
Well, I should, yes. I wanted to talk about the refi bill and get your input on that. With the rising cost of participating in a West Coast groundfish forum, are fishermen able to pay down their loans, and what should we be doing on that? I mean, to me, Magnuson-Stevens is not about the big, broad changes, but the constant staying on top of the industry needs and driving further efficiencies. And those resources help us drive further efficiencies where everybody wins. And so I certainly agree with your philosophy on that. But anyway, on the groundfish fisheries, any thoughts from either of you on that point?
First of all, on the weak stock issue, it's probably some of the bycatch stocks where the data stock assessments is most difficult. On the issue of buyback and some of the financial features of the groundfish fishery, the two principal challenges, I think, are refinancing or financing the buyback loans is one category, and the second is the scheduled reduction and phase out of federal support for observer coverage. And those are two real, substantial, immediate challenges facing the industry from a financial perspective.
Mr. Isaac, has the council looked at this issue, and did they have opinion?
Yes, the council has looked at it. We have a letter on record in support of the buyback bill that is out there for consideration. And as Mr. Still indicated, the individual fishermen out there that are now coming to the dock and paying a portion of their landings for this buyback loan, another portion for observer coverage, and of course all the normal state landing taxes, is quite a burden. So the council does feel like moving forward with refinancing a pretty old loan at a pretty high interest rate would be a good thing to do.
Okay, and just quickly, since I have about a minute left, hardly a subject for a minute, but how do the budget cuts, as it relates to salmon, affect our obligations as it relates to treaty rights, either Mr. Moon or Mr. Stell?
Mel, go first, please.
Well, certainly the work that we're doing on the coast, I think, is reaching a sustainability level. I know we've moved into management measures that have actually resulted in non-ESA situations on the coast. So those funds are well spent. We are, dealing with some plentiful stocks. Of course, there's a natural ebb and flow, but it would really be good to be able to maintain that level.
I'd flag two topics generally, Senator. The first is science on survivals, productivity and survivals, and in particular, nearshore marine, early life stage marine survivals. They're in the toilet, and we don't know why. And so it's creating a muffling productivity, and that's a major...
Is that about acidification, or...?
It could well be an indirect effect of changing acidification. So the first is productivity and the science around productivity, and the second, as you well know, is habitat. If we continue with the long-term demographics as we see them, and if we don't change the way we manage our landscapes, we're going to be losing habitat, and the loss of that continued loss of habitat is loss of productivity, which is loss of those trust resources. So those are, I would say, the two bigger challenges in salmon land. Salmon land management per se is quite sophisticated, quite stable, and in pretty good shape. So it's a science issue and it's a habitat issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you want to get to the second panel, as do I.
No problem. Let me just clarify one thing. When you say habitat, upstream habitat as well as...
Yes, sir. Riverine and estuarine.
Very good. Thank you very much. Makes me more confident in the decision I made last week, so thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll just say that I know we're going to hear on the second panel, about, this issue, and certainly, again, I applaud you for, working on this. When we start talking about, the same impacts that shellfish have had from acidification, that the food source for salmon having the same challenges, but certainly thank you for your global approach to all this.
Very much. Thank you very much. And for me, my questions I'll submit for the record for you to respond to, because I want to give to my two colleagues here as much time with the second panel as time will allow before the votes. But again, thank you all very much for attending today. Good information, good written testimony also. Thank you. If the next panel can come forward. And again, we have votes at 11:15. The first vote will be 15 minutes, and then 3 10-minute votes after that. So we'll have, I think, the ability to do the panel and probably get to your questions, because I'll skip my questions again, too. Thank you again to the next panel. We appreciate your willingness to attend today and participate. In those that, anytime we have folks from the West Coast, Hawaii, you have to travel long distance. So we thank you for taking the time to be here. I had someone last night I was supposed to be at an event with. They haven't been able to get out of Juneau for 2 days because of fog and other weather conditions. So thank you for attending. The first panelists we have, and I'll start from this side left and kind of my left, your right, I guess, and move forward. Michael Gatto, auctioneer with the United Fishing Agency of Honolulu. So Michael, we'll start with, there we go. Oh, I actually gone right to left now, okay. My list is that way, so Michael, we'll start with you. And we'll go ahead and again, we'll just go that way down the list. Go ahead, please, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologize for running in late. Security mixed up my jacket at the metal detector, so someone has my wallet in the building, so I might have a hard time getting home now.
Well, did you get a better jacket?
No, I did not. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak at this hearing for the reauthorization of Magnuson-Stevens Act. I would especially like to thank Senator Brian Schatz for his support and encouragement in having me at this hearing. My name is Michael Goto, and I'm representing the Hawaii-based longline fishery. I'm a third-generation operator of the Honolulu Fish Auction, the focus of the local seafood industry in the state. I serve on the board of directors of the Hawaii Longline Association, the main co-op of longline fishermen, as well as a council member on the Western Pacific Fishery Management Council. These positions have given me valuable insight into the realm of fisheries management, as well as the impacts of working under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. Members of the committee, my main point to you is simple. The Hawaii-based longline fishery is the most important tuna longline fishery in the United States. It is also a globally iconic model of environmentally responsible longline fishing. This fishery is a standard of sustainability and optimal use of fishing harvest through science-based management and commercial value of its products. This level of success has been achieved in part through the Magnuson-Stevens Act and the 10 national standards. Unfortunately, the MSA is not the only statute with which Hawaii longline fishery must comply. The application of other statutes, specifically the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and conservation members from international tuna conventions have the potential to impede the survival and continuity of the fishery, especially through the misuse of those statutes by litigious advocacy organizations. Additionally, the Hawaii fishery must also contend with market competition from foreign fisheries, which may be practicing illegal unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUU, whose adherence to sustainable fishery management is not nearly as regulated as those of any domestic fishery, especially the Hawaii longline fleet. To give you a little background, the Hawaii-based longline fishery consists of a shallow-set swordfish fishery and a deep-set tuna fishery, the latter of which is the core of the industry. Due to Hawaii's geography, the fishery operates mainly in the western Central Pacific Ocean. The target of the deep-set fishery is the Pacific big-eye tuna, which in its raw form yields the highly coveted product known as sashimi, one of the most highly sought food commodities in the world. Now that you've heard a little bit about the fishery, I'd like to throw some numbers at you for the sake of perspective. In a 2012 NOAA study, the Hawaii longline fleet was only 34th in the nation in landed seafood volume, yet was 5th in total landed value to the tune of $100 million. This amount was only at the base level, before wholesale and retail markups, before considering restaurants and tourism, even air cargo carriers and freight. All told, this small fishery produces nearly $500 million in domestic commerce. From the same 2012 study, the total U.S. domestic landings of big-eye tuna were around 15 million pounds. The Hawaii longline fleet landed 14 million of this total, translating to about 93% of the take attributed to the Hawaii longline fleet. This relates the importance of big-eye catch to both the Hawaii fleet and the commercial value of which it produces. Domestic is the key word here. Nearly 98% of Hawaii longline landings stay in the state or the continental U.S., with just 2% heading to foreign markets. To reiterate, this is a domestic fleet providing domestic product to a domestic market. Aside from the economic and national significance of the fishery, the underlying value is the great social and cultural importance to the state of Hawaii. The sashimi product has become a staple of local culture in Hawaii. It's the equivalent to crawfish in the Gulf, to salmon in Alaska, to lobster in New England, or to crab in Maryland. To be without this fundamental aspect of Hawaii culture is unthinkable. Hawaii is also critically dependent on seafood, not just as a cultural staple, but as a form of subsistence. Per capita, Hawaii residents annually consume about triple the amount of fish compared to the U.S. average, making locally caught fish a key component of food security to the state of Hawaii. In summary, the Hawaii longline fishery is a low-volume, high-value fishery. It contributes immensely to the economy and commerce to the state of Hawaii and the continental U.S., and sustains the culture and tradition of the state of Hawaii and contributes significantly to the food security of the islands. Talking quickly about management importance, with the guidance of Magnuson-Stevens Act and the 10 national standards, Hawaii fleet has pioneered exemplary fishery management, including the mitigation of protected species, the most important of which, and I see my time is about up, reducing interactions with protected species and impacts on the ecosystem, and complying with international quota-based management for harvesting tuna. I'll fast forward to the end of my ironically, the fisheries supplying tuna into the U.S. market are not held to the same standards in the Hawaii fleet, and I'm, of course, talking about imports. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing methods are continuously taking advantage of unfair situations that the Hawaii longline fishery finds itself in. With increase in crew transportation, enforcement costs, extreme fuel prices, the Hawaii fleet struggles to survive against these odds, especially with this foreign product undercutting their market and driving them out of business. Ultimately, current management measures in place are in effect giving opportunity for unregulated foreign product to flood the U.S. market, severely crippling the Hawaii fishery and having immeasurable environmental impacts. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, I have Mike Ravitz, Policy and Legislative Director, Marine Conservation Institute. Thank you very much for being here, Mike.
Thank you, Senators, and thank you, Senator Schatz, for inviting us here. On behalf of the Marine Conservation Institute, I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony on Magnuson-Stevens Act and needed improvements. As Sylvia Earle, one of this country's most distinguished ocean explorers, said so trenchantly, "Where there is no water, there is no life. Where there is no blue, there is no green." So just as blue places are required for the survival of green places, good habitat, something other people have mentioned, is the foundation for healthy oceans and fisheries. While there are many threats to the ocean, there is one overarching imperative: Scientists agree that protecting whole ecosystems rather than species one by one is the best, most cost-effective, and quickest way to maintain the ocean's biological diversity, its abundance, and resilience in the face of climate change. To accelerate ocean recovery in the U.S. and abroad, Marine Conservation Institute recently initiated the Global Ocean Refuge System, or GLORIES. GLORIES is designed to catalyze strong protection for at least 20% of the ecosystems in each marine area by 2030. Enough, we hope, to avert mass extinction that could come as the oceans warm and acidify. Turning to Magnuson-Stevens, based on the last 7 years of history, we believe that MSA is working well and needs only modest changes.
Mike, can I have you pause for 1 second? There's some background sound coming from somewhere. You can hear it now. So, I just wanted to make, because as you talk, it keeps interrupting, but I'll let the tech people figure it out. Go ahead.
Thank you. Like a 7-year-old car, it needs a tune-up and some touch-up paint. It does not need to be swapped for a new one. Its major parts are fine. Every hunter and nature lover knows that degraded habitats don't produce healthy wildlife populations on land. Why would we think it works any differently in the ocean? To address this, current law and regulations require the councils to evaluate new information about ocean habitat every 5 years and assess whether important places are being adequately protected. The program has designated hundreds of millions of acres of ocean as essential fish habitat, or EFH, but only a very tiny portion of this has received actual protection from damaging activities. And the application of the EFH principles and process has been uneven among councils. The Habitat Protection Program, we believe, can be greatly improved with a few straightforward fixes. Refocus habitat protection on smaller, more important places. Those are called habitat areas of particular concern, and require these places to have specific management measures to protect them and specific objectives to measure success. Use a precautionary approach on habitat and explicitly allow predictive models as the best available science to establish these important places until visual inspection of an area allows better decision-making. Require regional councils to protect identified concentrations of deep-sea corals with HAPC designation and management measures that prohibit bottom contact fishing. Mandate that 20% of each type of representative habitat in a region be protected from destructive fishing methods. Protecting marine habitat and life with laws and regulations is certainly a good first step, but laws do not enforce themselves. Adequate international enforcement against illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, known as pirate fishing, matters a great deal to U.S. fishermen and fishing communities. Based on reasonable assumptions, we believe that the U.S. may be importing from $1.2 to $2.9 billion of illegal catch a year, representing about 20% of U.S. imports. If this seafood was replaced with domestic product, the U.S. fishing industry might be able to reclaim as many as 28,000 jobs in coastal areas. State-by-state breakdowns of this total impact are available. Clearly, we need some other tools for faster and more effective enforcement than the current biennial international blacklist system for IU fishermen and nations. Even though our government personnel work hard every day, the process is not working well enough. Our cops simply need better tools to use. I want to also mention the importance of NOAA's Protected Resources Program that rebuilds populations of marine mammals and other endangered species on the Pacific Coast and around Hawaii. We work in Hawaii to build support among fishermen and local communities for the protection of the Hawaiian monk seal, one of the 4 rare seals on Earth. We started this program because NOAA seemed to lack the capability to effectively reach out to local fishermen and communities to explain its programs and build understanding. NOAA's ability to communicate with affected local communities about fisheries and protected species needs to improve, and we believe it can improve. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Ray Toast, President and General Manager, Washington Dungeness and Crab Fishermen's Association. Ray, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Your microphone, there we go. Perfect, thank you very much.
Senator Cantwell would just as soon take the mic away from me. Good morning. Chairman Beckage, Ranking Member Rubio, and Senator Cantwell. and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on MSA reauthorization. My name is Ray Tosti, and I reside in Westport, Washington. I'm president and general manager of the Washington Dungeness Crab Fishermen's Association, and I'm also co-founder of the Ocean Coalition of Fishermen, an umbrella group which over the last 17 years has grown to represent 17 member organizations, which represents over 5,000 individual members. Our members are in Washington, Oregon, California, and Alaska. Mr. Chairman, I've been fishing commercially for almost 5 decades. I was going to scratch that out, but I'm proud to say that I'm still working fishermen to this very day. My job takes me fishing not only my home state, but to California, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. It's profoundly gratifying to know that my work brings delicious American seafood to restaurants and kitchens across the country. It's the only way they, the American public, can share in this great heritage. And it is their resource. I was going to skip something here because I was told to, but I can't. And it has to do with Senator Cantwell and Mr. Beckich, who I met in Kenai more than once, especially when you were campaigning. You folks have shown a lot of courage, especially last week in Seattle. It's easy to be a Seahawk fan. It's not so easy to go against a powerhouse like you did on the Pebble Mine thing. Because of that, my youngest son will now be buying an outfit in Bristol Bay. Thank you, guys. You did well. I've always believed that conserving marine resources for future generations is a central part of a fisherman's responsibility. It's just simply the right thing to do. But as I grow older, I feel responsible to those who come after us more strongly than ever. For me, it's no longer an abstract thing, it's a personal thing. All 3 of my sons I have put through college. They all live in Westport, and they all commercial fish. Available to speak, the improved fisheries managers is the reason they are able to fish. Although I don't participate in the Pacific groundfish fishery, I've watched it closely for many years. Not having a stake in the fishery, I believe can comment as a neutral party. A decade or more ago, it was truly a mess. Overfishing had depleted the resource, hurting the environment, bottom line was bad. But not having a vested interest in it and going occasionally, sometimes you get a real good perspective of how well the Pacific Council has done. They've addressed the bycatch, been dramatically reduced. I'm here to tell this committee that sustainability mandates in Magnuson-Stevens Act are working. Pacific Fishery Management Council is to be commended for its role in improving and turning the fishery around. I also want to address the management of the Dungeness crab fisheries. This is a unique fishery requiring careful and customized management. I'm pleased to report that management is working well. Specific management arrangements were put in place in 1996, granting interim authority to the states of Washington, Oregon, and California out to 200 miles. The system has been uniquely successful for the Pacific, and it's a model that works there, may not work for somewhere else, but it works there. And since interim authority was first granted, a lot of managed improvements have been made, and they include LE 200, which I spent 89 coastal port meetings to achieve, and then ended cross-boundary fishing. We then went to pot limit. California, we test the same. It works. I'm optimistic about the future Pacific fishery. Sustainable science-based management has helped improve fisheries health. The choice of my 3 sons with college degrees speaks for itself. So long as Congress doesn't do damage to a good law and repeat the mistakes of the past, I believe they have a promising future working as commercial fishermen for many years. And once again, Senator Cantwell, I want to thank you. I have no idea how you got the money to do it. When you did it, the Doppler radar is a huge success. It is truly going to save lives. And one of those could well someday be a grandson. There's two things I know how to do well, I think: catch fish and create sons. And this is a huge help to Grace Harbor, and everybody thanks you. And thank you, Mr. Beckich.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. Next, I have Joe Daisy, Executive Director, Washington Trawlers Association. Joe?
How does this thing work? Okay. Thank you, Senator Begich, and also thank you, Senator Cantwell, for the invitation to address the committee. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington Trawlers Association, and in preparing my comments, I've consulted with the California Salmon Commission, the Oregon Salmon Commission, and the Oregon Albacore Commission. We have 4 issues we'd like to bring up. The first has to do with definitions, and it's something that rankles fishermen at every committee meeting I go to. The terms overfished and overfishing are used extensively throughout the Magnuson-Stevens Act. These terms are misleading and are used when harvest is not the reason for a stock's depleted status. There are instances in the lower Columbia River of stocks that have an extremely high probability of extinction within the next 50 years, even with 0 harvest levels. The HSRG has a 4H model that attributes stocks impacts to hydroelectric operations, hatcheries, habitat degradation, as well as harvest. The Magnuson-Stevens Reauthorization Act should provide a distinction between overfished and depleted designations. Next, we'd like to see more flexibility in rebuilding programs. Due to a predicted low return of Klamath Falls Chinook in 2006, the Pacific Fishery Management Council, with guidance from NIMS, felt constrained to close the fishery. The stock was not endangered. The fishery was closed due to a predicted low return that was below a floor number that would ensure maximum productivity. This closure came on the heels of a greatly reduced fishery in 2005, and the result was $150 million in economic loss and $60.4 million in disaster relief to fishermen in Oregon and California. Without fishing opportunity, there's a significant toll on families, unemployment goes up, there's increased load on social services, and local governments suffer from decreased tax revenue. This is one example. There have been a lot of closures of complete or partial of salmon fisheries over the years. Reauthorization of Magnuson-Stevens should provide for consideration of social and economic impacts on fishing communities by allowing a phase-in of rebuilding programs over 3 years. We'd also like to talk about annual catch limits, or ACLs. The albacore tuna fishery is managed by the ITTC and the Western Pacific Fishery Commission, as well as the U.S. Fishery Management Councils. Establishing unilateral conservation measures such as ACLs or limited entry will constrain the U.S. fleet while having little or no effect on conserving the resource. Foreign fleets are building and ours are not. If such measures are taken, U.S. representatives to international treaty discussions will have diminished ability to protect U.S. interests. The Council should have flexibility in deciding the timing and benefit of internationally managed stocks with ACLs, and in addition, the establishment of an annual catch limit can have significant economic impacts on fishing communities. The Council should have the ability to take this into consideration when deciding an ACL. We'd also like to talk about data collection. Data collection can benefit from collaboration between fishermen and scientists. This has been demonstrated by a project undertaken in 2007 using disaster relief money made available to fishermen in Oregon and California. A project was undertaken to collect tissue samples from Chinook salmon, which were then analyzed for their genetic markers. Salmon returns are currently estimated using the Fishery Resource Allocation Model, the FRAM. The FRAM gets its inputs from coded wire tags. There are several issues with coded wire tags, notably that they only sample a small portion of hatchery stocks and no wild stocks, and it's the wild stocks that are endangered. The coded wire tags are also collected at shoreside processors. If they're collected at sea, we get a better idea of where the fish were actually caught, where the distributions of fish stocks are. The GSI samples have shown different distributions of fish stocks than modeled in the FRAM. GSI at-sea collection of samples has the potential to significantly improve salmon management by shifting effort away from endangered stocks. The MSA Reauthorization Act should encourage collaborative research between fishermen and scientists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last person we have is Dr. Trevor Branch, Assistant Professor, Aquatic and Fishery Science, University of Washington. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you very much, Chairman Begich and other members of the subcommittee for the privilege of testifying at this hearing. It is, of course, a special honor to speak before Senator Cantwell from my hometown of Edmonds, and, of course, on the eve of this weekend's Super Bowl. I'll focus my remarks on key elements of the Magnuson-Stevens Act that impact fisheries on the west coast of the U.S. First, some context. Globally, we've reached the limits of what it is possible to catch from the ocean. Worldwide catches peaked in the mid-1990s and have since declined by about 5%, and 30% of the world's fisheries are overfished. U.S. fisheries are doing somewhat better. Yesterday's updated report from NOAA shows that 20% of U.S. fisheries are overfished and 13% are experiencing overfishing. These encouraging results arise directly from the 2006 reauthorization of the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which requires annual catch limits, or ACLs, and strict rebuilding time periods for overfished stocks. In comparison to the world and to the U.S. as a whole, West Coast fisheries are in good shape biologically. Only 8% of assessed stocks are overfished, and none are experiencing overfishing. On the West Coast, although more than 90 species of groundfish are managed by the Council, regulations are driven by 7 species that are under rebuilding plans. Since the bottom trawl fishery catches many species together, strict regulations have been put into place, including closing productive fishing areas, gear restrictions, vessel buybacks, highly restrictive ACLs, and most recently catch shares, which include 100% observer coverage. One of the key issues in the groundfish fishery is the real fear of a disaster tow, where a single large catch could stop individuals fishing for all species for the entire year. In particular, the catch limit for yellow-eye rockfish is just 2,205 pounds, which is less, I might add, than the starting lineup of the Seattle Seahawks. And that amounts to just 20 pounds of yellow-eye per boat for the entire year. If these limits are exceeded, pounds must be bought or leased from others before they can continue fishing. It's a testament to the strong incentives under catch share fisheries and also the fear of the fishermen that the fleet caught just 6% of this yellow-eye quota in 2013. In most respects, catch shares are working as they were intended to. They allow maximum flexibility in when, where, and how to fish. Under catch shares, discards have declined, revenues have gone up, and catches of the rebuilding species have gone down. However, profits could be still higher. The focus in this fishery on rebuilding the weakest links has led to substantial undercatching of the ACLs. Only 3 of 26 stocks in the catch share fishery has catches anywhere close to the ACLs, while catches for the average stock are just 27% of the respective ACL. The net result is that about 10 times more catch is lost due to underfishing than to overfishing. Catch shares have had a major positive impact on the biology and economics of the West Coast groundfish fishery. Looking forward, I predict that catch shares will be called upon to address allocation issues in the future. For example, charter boats might buy quota from the commercial fishers to increase bag limits for their clients. In revising the Act, careful thought is needed as to whether or not quotas should be sold or leased across different sectors, such as trawlers, longliners, recreational fishers, charter boats, and tribal groups. ACLs are a key requirement under the MSA. Without annual fisheries independent surveys, stock assessments will be inaccurate and so will the ACLs. The reauthorization should stress the critical importance of continued or perhaps expanded funding of annual bottom trawl surveys, pot surveys, hook and line surveys, and diver surveys, depending on the region. Setting ACLs has also greatly increased the demand for stock assessments. It is estimated that NOAA will need to add 140 new hires to the current 90 capable of running these assessments. However, funding has lagged in the two major programs that support graduate student training in this field. The first program is a fellowship program between NOAA and Sea Grant that now covers less than half of a typical PhD. The second program is NSF, which rarely funds fisheries research, especially since the NSF NOAA program called Cameo fell victim to budget cuts. To summarize, U.S. fisheries are in better shape than the rest of the world thanks to the MSA. The focus on rebuilding West Coast species has been biologically successful, but will take many years because these species, a lot of them are very long-lived. Extra flexibility in rebuilding timelines would greatly increase revenues and profits currently lost when fishers avoid the overfished species. The key to future success is prioritizing annual surveys and training stock assessment scientists to meet NOAA's current and future needs. Thank you once again for inviting me to testify.
Thank you very much. And again, to my colleagues, the vote has started, but we'll have time for both of you to do your questions. I'll submit mine for the record. I actually have some additional ones now that you've made some interesting comments, all of you. So let me pause, and Senator Schatz and then Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Chair Begich, and I'll submit some additional questions for the record, but my very quick question for Mr. Goto is, could you just explain on the ground what pirate fishing means to you at the fish auction and what the real economic impacts are, as quickly as you can, since we're having a vote? Before you get started, I just wanted to announce that we found his coat.
Oh, good. And just so you know, Senator Schatz, we have, each of you can take your 5 minutes, because then we'll be able to tag the vote on the back end.
Okay.
But I'm glad he found his coat.
Yes, now I can fly home and watch Peyton Manning win the Super Bowl. I'm just kidding. I'm the most unpopular person in the room now. Senator, to address your question, IUU, we don't see it directly ourselves, but the impacts of it are very substantial. The only real competition that any domestic fishery has is with imported product, and to really show how that affects the domestic market, we see fluctuations in price, especially in our system of sales. We do an auction system, so the market basically flows as the demand flows. Hawaii caught tuna and all seafood has developed a very good reputation across the globe, and it's very popular, and it really does compete with cheaper, I'll say unsustainably caught product, because despite the fact that you may know the origins of it, you don't have any indicators of how it was caught or the impacts that were taken because of it. So not only are those the issues, but it really does affect the value of our fish. If we do have a lot coming in at a certain time, it'll really cause the market to dip. And the fishermen's expenses are very high, as I brought up within my testimony. Fuel prices are through the roof. You think when you go to the gas pump to fill up your car, it's expensive. Imagine filling up a 75-foot boat. It's really expensive just to get that. And then there are crew transport issues, regulatory issues. It really adds up. So to produce food, we all think food comes from farms and ocean, but we don't really think about the sustained costs of it. And like I said, to project that down the line, if the fishery is going to lose money or the vessels are going to lose money, it's a disaster in the end for them. They can't keep on going. They can't keep on producing in light of, like I said, the unsustainable product that's being brought in. So to answer your question, Senator, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for this important hearing. And I just want to say to Mr. Gatto, the chairman of this committee is making a name for himself here, making sure that our colleagues, when it comes to disaster relief or whatever, understand that you can't just aid the food product that grows out of the ground and ignore the catastrophes we have in the ocean. So I want to thank him for continuing to educate my colleagues on that and on frankenfish. So he's done a good job on both of those issues. Dr. Branch, talk about the thin fish, salmon and whiting, as it relates to ocean acidification. What are the impacts? What are the concerns? I know you gave a great representation of how we were doing on the Pacific Council and where we are juxtaposed with the rest of the world, but don't we have a looming issue here with acidification and some of the things that were cited in the previous Mr. Stell's comments about the near shore issue?
Yes, for ocean acidification, I think there are still some unknown questions. Up until the last 5 or 10 years, it was thought that fish wouldn't be affected at all by ocean acidification, that it would mainly be bivalves, mollusks, clams, and oysters, and so on, which they are already affecting on the West Coast. But then some people have been doing research on clownfish, of all things, the Nemos of the ocean, showing that if you give them a choice between two sides of an experimental aquarium, one side containing the smell of a predator and the other side containing just seawater, usually they will avoid the side with the predator smell. But if you put them in slightly acidified water, about what you'd get before the turn of the century, they will choose the side with the predator smell in preference. They actually think it's an interesting smell to go and explore. They get bolder and less cautious. And if you take these same juvenile clownfish and you put them out in the coral reef, it turns out they get eaten about 10 times more often than ones in regular seawater. So this is something where, if this is true not only of clownfish and other tropical reef fish, but also of our fish on the West Coast, this could be a big issue. And I think we need to find out if that is true or not.
And how can we leverage the acidification research? How can NOAA leverage what's being done at the University of Washington Center on acidification now? How could we work cooperatively? Because we meet fishermen all throughout our region that are ready to help participate in collecting data and information.
I think the key, the new center at the University of Washington, thanks very much to funding for that, I think is going to be a key part of figuring out what species are going to be affected and what species aren't, and how to cope with ocean acidification in the future, and hopefully mitigate against the causes of ocean acidification as well.
Do we have the science that we need, Mr. Daisy?
I don't know if we have enough science or not. There's been a lot of research done on ocean acidification by Dr. Feeling and some of Dr. Branch's associates at the University of Washington. One of the things that concerns the salmon fleet is that ocean acidification will affect copepods, and that's a large part of the diet of juvenile salmon.
So we were talking about a shellfish that they feed on being affected just as the shellfish industry has been affected.
That is correct.
And so, which was a very big threat, and only data and information got us through this buoy system, the right kind of information to help in that seeding process. So what would we do here if it's such a big food source for salmon?
That's correct. Copepods are a huge resource for salmon. One of the possibilities in doing the at-sea collection of GSI samples is collecting things like ocean acidity or temperatures, other things beyond just the tissue sample from the fish. That, of course, requires more effort from the fisherman and takes time away from his primary business of catching fish.
Well, the reason I bring this up is because throughout this hearing, we've had a lot of dialogue about all the things we're doing to try to protect salmon, and yet I think we also have to realize that there is this larger looming threat of acidification, and so while we've all been aware that this is accelerating or having an impact on the oceans, I think this one is a very big potential. Before I have very quick, I'm just going to ask Mr. Tosti about the access question about young fishermen and what we need to do to continue to make sure that they have access.
In Washington State, in the crab fishery, Phil Anderson, the director, and I got our heads together a couple of years ago, and we enacted a two-part bill through the legislature, and it was on the transfer of crab permits. I think if you're a young man and you've got a boat that you're trolling with, the investment of crab gear is huge. The investment of crab gear and a permit may make it impossible. I think if there's some way to help fund permits. Now, in Alaska, you have a banking system that does just that. At one time in Alaska, the permits couldn't even be taken by the IRS, or in the case of a divorce. So a lot of guys were buying crab permits. The state of Alaska brought that to an end in a hurry. But what we did is we made the license transferable every 365 days. And the permit, if I'm selling this fellow my permit, say for $50,000, and he gives me 5 down, and he's going to pay me over the next 10 years, I hold the permit in my name. He simply has an additional operator's license. So that way I can finance that permit as I sell out, which when you get my age, selling them out over a period of time is inviting. For the young man getting in, it's inviting. It's kind of helped there. I know it's worked there on crab, but not a lot of the other states do that. California is nearly impossible to buy into. And I think bankers, if they knew that they could use a permit as collateral, would be an enormous help to getting people in.
Thank you. And my colleague and I, Senator Begich, had a listening session in Seattle, and it's very clear there's many aspects of the fishing industry, whether it's the permit issue or vessel issue, that our friends in the banking industry don't understand, and yet the very, very solid, managed resources.
Yeah.
So it's very, very predictable from that perspective. So anyway, again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for all your indulgence in this very important issue, not just to our region, but to our whole nation. I really appreciate your leadership on it.
Thank you very much, Senator Cantwell, and thank you all for being here. And let me say this, and this is the comment I use a lot, and that is, we're about to probably Monday, Tuesday, vote on a farm bill and move forward. And as I like to say, if you can imagine that farm bill called the fish bill, all those programs that are in there, the value of that and what it would be. And I always say the only difference is we harvest from the sea versus the land, but it's a food product that is utilized not only for consumption, Hawaii is a great example, triple consumption, but also it's an export product for us around the world. So we hope, and that's our effort, to create equity. When they talk about the farm bill, we'd like to see a fish bill of equal quality. So that's the long term, but we really thank you all for being here today. I will keep the record open for 2 weeks. I will submit my questions. We do have a vote that closes in just a couple minutes, but again, thank you all very much for participating. At this time, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.